But seriously, I think back to, these kids just going out and they're doing their thing and they're just misunderstood and a horrible crime happens. And you've got a town full of people going, who in the hell could have did this? And the hippies did it. And they point at these three people, and the next thing you know, they're spending a big chunk of their life behind bars.
There's an epidemic in America's criminal justice system. The prosecution and conviction of innocent people for crimes they did not commit. Welcome to the American Justice Podcast. Your hosts, Scott Poggensee and C. Derick Miller, come together to bring you the inside scoop on all of the wrongful conviction stories, both new and old. It's not only about the innocent who have been in prison, but also the victims of crimes as well. No one deserves justice more than them. And now, here are your hosts, Scott Poggensee and C. Derick Miller.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the American Justice Podcast,
where we talk shit
and we talk crime, but we never talk shitty crime. All right. Well, see, Derick, today we're going to be talking about the West Memphis 3.
Finally, a case that I know something about.
Finally.
Yes. I actually knew who I'm not a true crime junkie, so to speak. I'm a writer. And these subjects are placed in front of me. I dive deep, and then I come out with all of this. This is a case that I knew a lot about.
Yeah, it's a pretty famous case.
It's a pretty famous case. I hadn't heard about it until about maybe 2010, but I was in a relationship with somebody who was just head over heels in love with this case and everything about it. And the book, The Devil's Knot, and the documentaries that came out. And so I kind of had no choice but to know things about this case. Plus, and I've been to West Memphis, Arkansas a few times in my life as well. And back in my longer-haired days, I would choose just to keep driving.
Keep on driving.
That's a damn good way to get accused of something in that town.
Right.
You have long hair and you listen to that there heavy metal, you must be a killer.
You can just go keep on driving. All right. Well, let's get into it. As the media like to refer to them as men, the West Memphis 3 were three kids convicted for the 1993 murders of three young boys in West Memphis, Arkansas. Damian Eccles, who was sentenced to death, Jesse Miskelly Jr., who was sentenced to life plus 2 20-year sentences, and Jason Baldwin, who was sentenced to life. During the trial, the prosecutor tried his best to make everyone believe the kids were killed as part of a satanic ritual.
Now, this is something that gets on my nerves when it comes to the legal system in America. And this is something that got on my nerves when I worked in the legal system here in America. Is life sentences plus 20 years. Was in case you return from the grave, you're going to spend the first 20 years as an animated corpse in jail.
In jail.
Just call it life and get on with it, man.
Can we get a zombie jail?
Yes,
That'd
zombie
awesome.
jail.
That'd be
we
awesome.
had that. Walking Dead season 3.
Well, the case generated widespread controversy and was the subject of a few documentary films due to the dubious nature of the evidence and the suspected presence of emotional bias in the courtroom. Celebrities such as Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam, Natalie Maines of the Dixie Chicks, a.k.a. the Chicks, yes, they have lost the Dixie part, and Johnny Depp, Peter Jackson, and several others helped free them in the end with massive financial support.
I used to be in love with Natalie Maines.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Johnny Depp.
Not a bad looking dude. Not a bad looking dude. But the first time I ever saw a Dixie Chicks music video, the singer, there was just something about her voice and her look. I could just watch those videos over and over again. Of course, this was 22, 23 years ago. Not really sure what she's got going on right now, but I remember her name was the first name that popped out to me when I saw the celebrity response for these three guys.
Ah, cool. Well, the Arkansas Supreme Court regarded new DNA evidence and potential juror misconduct in 2010. The convicted negotiated a plea bargain and were set free in 2011. It was known as the Alford plea, which allowed them to assert their innocence while acknowledging the prosecutors had enough evidence to convict them. The judge accepted the pleas and gave them time served.
That's because that entire state of Arkansas, I almost called it Oklahoma. Bad enough. They border each other.
Right.
Our last week's case was Oklahoma. Now we go one state over to Arkansas. And they were getting a really bad rap by some very famous people in the media. But when you go into last week's case, again, too, you think of all the celebrities that are assisting Julius Jones with any potential, retrials or anything like that.
Right.
You have like Kim Kardashian. But we're talking Peter Jackson. We're talking the guy who directed the Lord of the Rings movies. We're talking Johnny Depp. We all know what he's been in. Natalie Maines, Eddie Vedder. Come on, man. The only singer that's still alive from the great 1990s Seattle rock explosion. He's the last. Everybody else is dead.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's crazy. Well, let's talk about the crime. On May 5th, 1993, 3 boys by the name of Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, all of them 8 years old, were reported missing. That report was made by the Byers boys' adoptive father, John, at around 7 p.m. 3 of their neighbors were the last to see the young boys together. The police in West Memphis did their version of a search, but some friends and neighbors of the families did their own search as well.
You never heard of an Arkansas search before?
What's that?
I said,
Hey, y'all out here? No? All right.
Everything good?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Okay.
I seen lightning. They're after chasing lightning bugs. They'll be back. They'll be all right.
Well, the next day, a more thorough search was conducted by the county search and rescue team. They did a shoulder-to-shoulder search of the Robin Hood Hills, where they were last seen alive and playing, but nothing was found.
A shoulder-to-shoulder search of the Robin Hood Hills.
I mean,
with his merry men.
They
It looked like the Rockettes, where they're all like grasp each other on their shoulders and they're kicking.
It kind of does give you a visual, though.
It does.
That they were all close together walking through the woods.
Oh, merry man.
I was a merry man once. Anyways, then a juvenile officer by the name of Steve Jones saw a little boy's shoe floating in a creek. That creek led them to a drainage canal where the 3 boys' bodies were located. They were naked, tied up with their own shoelaces. Hog-tied, actually. Google is free, and it's in your pocket.
Yes, just in case anybody doesn't know what a hog tie is. Not everybody was born in the South.
Right. Their clothes were found in the creek, and some of it appeared to be wrapped around sticks in an attempt to get the clothing to stick to the creek bottom. It had all been turned inside out for some reason, and 2 of the boys' underwear was never recovered. I don't think anyone bothered to think that maybe these 2 boys just didn't wear underwear.
It's a possibility.
But the fact that it was missing led people to believe that it was kept as some kind of trophy. Also, the Byers boys' penis and scrotum had been mutilated. Give a redneck an inch and they'll take a mile.
Yeah, they will.
This is why everyone thought it was part of a satanic ritual. The accused all had long hair and listened to heavy metal. For the residents of West Memphis, that was enough to link them to the devil. I think you had long hair.
I did
at one time, didn't you? I never did, but I think I remember seeing pictures of you.
And that's what I was saying earlier. I would drive through West Memphis on my way back from New York City, knowing that I only had a handful of hours to go before I made it back to Dallas, and I would be needing gas, something fierce. I didn't want to stop in the big cities. I didn't want to stop in Memphis. And so right across the river from Memphis, you have West Memphis, Arkansas. It's those cities that are like that in different states where they have the same names because somebody dropped the ball and didn't want to be creative. I don't know. They had a migraine or something on the day where they were naming cities. And so it's just West Memphis, Arkansas. And I remember this case. like my really long hair, going to a truck stop, which is already Yeehaw Mecca.
Right.
And just going, you know what? I think I can make it all the way to Little Rock. I think I'll be fine. I'm not stopping in West Memphis no matter what.
If I run out of gas, I'm calling AAA.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the autopsies revealed that Byers died of multiple injuries, while the other two boys, Moore and Branch, were also drowned. The West Memphis police suspected the boys had been raped, or maybe that's what they hoped for. Arkansas, you know.
Yeah. They're like, they've been raped. Are you sure? Well, we was hoping.
Expert testimony disputed that, and there was much swapping of $100 bills at the police station afterwards. Lost bets and all.
You can never guess who wrote this episode.
Right. They found sperm DNA in a pair of pants. I mean, all kinds of fluids go squirting everywhere when you die.
They do.
It's true. It's not just pee and poop.
Nope.
So no one ever proved who the sperm belonged to. There was also a lot of evidence that animals had their way with the victims' bodies post-mortem.
As animals will do.
Because they were floating in this river, this canal.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even like a river or canal. It was like a creek, like a drainage ditch.
Yeah.
So you're talking like just rain runoff from the highways and you know, who knows, maybe like some industrial waste or whatever.
Right,
I mean, just whatever collects after storms in West Memphis, Arkansas.
Well, see, Derick, who were the victims? They were all second graders, best buddies, and Cub Scouts.
I'm sure they were just adorable little kids.
Stephen Branch, Mark Byers, and James Michael Moore. No, not the filmmaker.
Oh, man. I thought we were on to something there for a second.
They were typical young boys from the South. They loved the outdoors, and they were best friends. Stephen and Mark both came from broken homes, which is still fairly standard for young kids in the southern United States this very day.
I was one of them.
Some say that James was the leader of the group. I can imagine that he tried to protect the other two from the attackers, and that's why he got it worse than the other two. Testicular mutilation and such.
Yeah, he definitely got it worse.
I can imagine that the other two became rather submissive after he fell and were drowned. I remember being that age, and I can't imagine what it would have been like to be confronted with such nightmarish horror. A memorial was erected on the playground of the elementary school that they attended. That's some creepy shit for some little kids to have to look at every day.
Yeah, can you imagine that?
I know, I
just
cannot.
Being a little kid, you know, all these years later and going out to play on the playground and like, hey, man, you know where that statue came from?
Yeah. Who are those guys?
These three little kids. And they got kidnapped and their junk got all tore up and then they got drowned in a creek. But, you know, go play, kids.
Go play. Welcome to elementary school. Now on to the suspects. When they were arrested, Jesse Miskelly Jr. was 17, Jason Baldwin was 16, and Damian Eccles was 18. Still, I was called a kid when I was those ages, so I'll always refer to them as kids. They've been in trouble with the law previously for vandalism, shoplifting, and fist-fighting with other teenagers. You know, typical long-haired teenager stuff. It's all the stuff I did when I was that age.
Except for the long hair part.
Maybe that's why I've always been so sympathetic toward the convicted in this case. They were me. Eventually, Miskelly and Eccles dropped out of high school, but Baldwin stayed. He had good grades and was a good artist. They were all reported to be huge haters of the town of West Memphis and everything it stood for. The Bible Belt and a bunch of down-home goodness associated with the South. I can relate to that as well. To this day, I'm not a big fan of my birthplace for the exact same reason.
Well, I mean, for real. I mean, we've discussed several times on this podcast my feelings toward my hometown of Greenville, Texas, a.k.a. Hunt County, where the Brandon Woodruff case took place in season 1. And it's the same thing. I grew up, I was the long-haired kid, listened to the heavy metal music, and I was totally misunderstood. I came from a family who was hell-bent on going to church every time the doors were open. We would even get to the parking lot early, like we were trying to get a better seat at a basketball game or something. It's just my entire life growing up was centered around church and religion. And here I was, the long-haired kid, listening to the devil's music, and all my friends were long-haired kids, and we were listening to the devil's music. And, all we wanted was to have a good time and to be able to smoke a cigarette somewhere and not get screwed with.
Right.
And, I think about these three suspects, and I think about me growing up and my friends growing up, and just how we were misunderstood, because Greenville, Texas is known. It used to be known, not anymore. I was just recently informed this is no longer a thing, but at one time it was in the Guinness Book of World Records as having the most churches per capita than any other city in the United States. Now, I've been told that is no longer true. They might be second now. I don't know, but they're still up there. And just me, my friends, the long-haired kids, we were all very misunderstood.
Your Stories on Video is the perfect service to preserve all of your memories for generations to come. If you've ever thought to yourself that it's time to get all of those precious memories down on video, now is the time. Here's a quick sample of one of our videos.
My name is Daryl Kaiser, and I was born in 1925 in Canby, Minnesota. The happiest day of my life. It has to be when I got married. Yeah, that would have to be my happiest day. I sat down in a chair that was several chairs, and there was women on the opposite side. And I ordered me a drink, and I looked down that way, and Betty was looking at me. So I winked at her. And the next thing I know, then I went and asked her for a dance, and we danced and several times, and then I asked to take her home. I can't say that I ever gets out of my mind at all.
Daryl hired Your Stories on Video because he wants his grandkids and their grandkids to hear from his own mouth and his own likeness what his life was like. He also shared the family ancestry as only he could. Going back and researching archives are one thing, but watching the person that lived it is so much better. The process to get a video is very simple. Just go to www.yourstoriesonvideo.com and request a consultation. Then one of our experienced story consultants will work with you from the beginning to the end to make sure your video is exactly what you want it to be. Many kinds of individuals and families utilize our service, from the older generation wanting to pass down their wisdom to those that have an unfortunate medical diagnosis. Contact Your Stories on Video today at yourstoriesonvideo.com. Mention the American Justice Podcast and receive a 25% discount.
All right. So Eccles was a poor kid. He didn't go to school much, and the family was always getting visits from CPS and social workers. He was charged with burglary once because he and one of his girlfriends broke into a trailer during a rainstorm. I can relate to this as well. Sounds like the sexiest thing I could have done in my mid-teens in a rainstorm. I can almost smell it now. The scent of Marlboro cigarettes, denim jackets, and Walmart cheap perfume all being stirred up by the rain. He spent some time in a mental institution where he was diagnosed with persecutory delusions, auditory and visual hallucinations, disordered through the processes, substantial lack of insight, and chronic incapacitating mood swings.
Probably caused by the chronic.
Basically, I think he's a writer, see, Derick?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we all suffer from that.
See, if somebody would have just nurtured this kid's talent in his younger years, perhaps he'd be on the American Justice Podcast instead of Us.
Yeah.
At one point in the trial, Eccles' psychologist said that he had claimed to have superpowers by drinking human blood. This also sounds like some stupid shit I would have said for attention in high school. Hooray for heavy metal.
I miss it every day.
Now, when the investigation began, West Memphis police thought that there were only two suspects, one by the name of Chris Morgan and another named Brian Holland. They had drug offenses on their record and had split for California shortly after the bodies were discovered. Morgan drove an ice cream truck in that neighborhood, so, guilty by stereotype.
Yeah.
They were caught in California and given polygraphs which showed deception. Morgan even said on the record that he might have killed the kids, but he couldn't remember.
Here we go with that again.
Maybe he had a dream.
Man,
about
I
it.
could have had a dream. I could swear that I killed somebody last night.
Right. He was prone to having blackouts from all the drugs and drinking. They submitted blood and urine, but the West Memphis Police Department decided that they were no longer suspects, even though one of them said that he might have done it.
That's so strange.
I'm shaking my damned head in 2022.
For real. I mean, you've got it. Well, I don't know. You go back to earlier in this season, and you've got the guy that had the dream, and he's like, I think I killed somebody, and they're like, none of the evidence points to you. He's like, no, I'm pretty damn sure I killed someone. Shut up.
Quit talking. Yeah, there was definitely some psychotic stuff. All right. Well, there was talk of an additional suspect when the trial first started. A Bojangles restaurant about a mile away from where the boys' bodies were found called police about a mentally disoriented black man who was inside the restaurant's ladies' room. He appeared to be bleeding. A cop came to the restaurant and took a report through the drive-through window, but never went inside to check the blood on the wall. How lazy can you be?
Right? I guess they just didn't want to go to the ladies' room.
Well, I mean, then again, when you think you already have your suspects in mind, you can just build a case around that, right?
That seems to be the reoccurring theme here.
For reference, check out seasons 1 and 2 of the American Justice Podcast. Finally, the police did come back and take some blood samples after the fact, but a detective by the name of Bryn Ridge stated he lost those blood scrapings. Later, a hair identified as belonging to a black male was recovered from a sheet wrapped around one of the victims' bodies,
as opposed to one of the sheets wrapped around one of the police.
The cops thought early on that the crime felt like a cult killing. Really? Are there lots of cult killings going on in the bustling burg of West Memphis? Geez, the early 90s, hair metal and hail Satan, am I right? They thought Eccles was involved since he expressed interest in the occult. Because of this, the cops felt that he was capable of murdering kids. I mean, I used to read books about the Zodiac Killer in 6th grade, but I wasn't sick enough to hurt people. What kind of basic detective skills can you get from the bottom of a Fruity Pebbles box or Cracker Jacks even? Eccles took a polygraph, but showed deception as well. He mentioned one of the victims having wounds on their genitals, and the cops immediately thought this to be incriminating. I'm sure everyone in the town knew several details not relayed to the media just by simple word of mouth. Perhaps a cop at the Bojangles drive-thru said something. They continued to interrogate Eccles for a whole month because they couldn't find any worthy leads.
And this is what I'm thinking about right here. This is a really small town. I don't even know what I could compare it to. People think West Memphis. Oh, this is a section of Memphis, Tennessee. It is not. Memphis, Tennessee ends at the Mississippi River. You cross the bridge, and then you are in West Memphis, Arkansas. It is basically a truck stop with a small town built around it. That is West Memphis, Arkansas. There's not a whole lot to it. Everybody would have to know. I can compare it to my hometown growing up. Not so much my hometown now because it's grown quite a bit, but my hometown growing up. Everybody knew everybody else. Everybody was in everybody else's business. And, the cops they're going to interact with the general public when they're off duty, whether they're at the Walmart, or they're at church, or they're going out to eat dinner. They're going to talk to other people about this ongoing case because, let's face it, there's nothing else to talk about in West Memphis, Arkansas. And this is how people were getting, this had to be how these people were getting this information. So, of course, they probably heard about this through leaks in the department.
Right. And everybody's a friend of someone else. It's
Exactly.
a friend of someone else, yeah. Well, on June 3rd, the police questioned Jesse Miskelly Jr. He was a minor at the time with an IQ of 72. Again, we had guys like this in my group of thugs I called friends, so I don't find this strange at all. They picked at him for 12 hours straight, but only recorded about an hour and a half of the questioning. He confessed, but recanted, citing intimidation, coercion, fatigue, and threats. He was frightened of the police. Yeah, they have a tendency to do that to people that they believe weaker than they. His confession hit the front page of the Memphis newspaper before the trial even began.
And that sounds typical, too.
Right. Eccles and Baldwin were arrested shortly after this from information given by Miss Kelly. The fact that he wasn't the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree and had been bullied by the cops into a confession carried no weight whatsoever.
Nope. If you got your suspects incarcerated already, you can build the case around them.
That's right. All right. Well, see, Derick, let's talk about some witnesses.
Let's do that.
Well, Vicki Hutchison, a new resident of West Memphis, would play an important role in the investigation, though she would later recant her testimony, claiming her statements were fabricated due in part to coercion from the police. You don't say.
No, not at all.
Shortly before the victims were found, Hutchison took a polygraph to determine whether or not she had stolen money from her job.
Guilty.
Wait, how does West Memphis PD afford to dish out all these polygraphs? Do they have lie detectors in the trunks of their cars?
Either that or they went to liedetector.gov and Uncle Joe sent them out like the COVID test.
A bunch of polygraph tests.
Yes, every family in West Memphis, Arkansas got 4 in the mail.
All right. Well, anyway, her son was such a distraction to the officer conducting the lie detection that he had to quit. The kid, who was a friend of the victims, claimed that they had been killed at their playhouse. Once the bodies were found near where the kid claimed, they continued to question him. The kid, named Aaron, said he'd witnessed the murders. They were committed by Satanists who spoke Spanish, Español.
¿Dónde está Casa de Pepe?
Even though his statements were inconsistent gibberish and he couldn't point out the suspects in a lineup, his info was leaked to the media. Thus, the claims of Satanism.
Yes, this little shit kid, all hyped up on Adderall and probably cocaine from last week's case. He all hyped up, wouldn't leave the cop alone, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it was Mexican Satanists," and the cops believed him, and so did the media.
Right.
West Memphis, Arkansas. It's on their water tower. When you drive by the water tower in West Memphis, Arkansas, it says "Home of the Mexican Satanists."
Nice.
That's what their football team is called. They're the West Memphis Mexican Satanists.
I like to see their mascot.
Same here.
All right. Well, Hutchison agreed to hide microphone. Get this, see, Derick. Hutchison agreed to hide microphones in her house during an encounter with Eccles after Miss Kelly introduced them.
Well, and before she did that, she had to take down all the webcams from her OnlyFans account.
Right.
That did not exist when this case happened.
Right. If we would have only thought of it back then. All right. Well, Eccles actually said nothing incriminating, though, and most claim that you couldn't even hear anything on the recordings. Then Hutchison claimed that she, Eccles, and Miss Kelly attended a Wiccan meeting. Oh, God. Here we go again with the frightening groups from the Bible Belt. Satanism and Wiccans have absolutely nothing in common. Didn't people read books back in 1993? I mean, I know there wasn't Google. It wasn't free and it wasn't in their pockets, but there were such things as bookstores with rather extensive occult sections. Where do you think I got all my books from?
Yeah.
Anyway, she stated Eccles got drunk and claimed to have killed the 3 boys. Later, Miss Hutchison confessed that she made her entire story up to avoid criminal charges from the West Memphis Police Department for theft. Crooked police? Who would have thunk it?
Well, why were there going to be theft charges? I mean, did she fail her polygraph?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I guess so.
All right, well, let's talk about the thief.
Starlet from us, the precious.
Let's talk about the trial. Miss Kelly was tried separately while Eccles and Baldwin were tried together in 1994. The Bruton Rule, which states that a defendant was deprived of his rights under the Confrontation Clause if a confession by his co-defendant was introduced in their joint trial, regardless of whether the jury received instructions only to consider it against the confessor.
Sounds complicated to me.
All right, well, all three of them pleaded not guilty.
Of course they did.
During the Miss Kelly trial, an expert on false confessions from UC Berkeley testified that Miss Kelly's recorded confession was a classic example of police coercion. His multiple confessions over time were inconsistent with each other, and his facts regarding the crime scene and victims never matched. West Memphis Police Department thought the victims were raped because their anuses had been dilated, but that's actually typical of post-mortem behavior. Science wins again. Lots of anal dilation going on in the city of West Memphis, isn't there? He was convicted of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder and given life plus 40 years in prison. It was appealed, but upheld by the Arkansas Supreme Court. I guess it's hard to find a jury of your peers when you're a stoned-out metalhead with a wimpy IQ in a town full of Bible thumpers, huh?
That's my thought.
Railroaded is a much better word in my opinion. I know we're not supposed to use this word in this day and age, but for a lack of a better term, the dude was borderline retarded.
For real.
No matter, though. One less long-haired Satanist roaming in the streets of West Memphis, Arkansas, right?
Right. We can't have them just roaming freely, dilating anuses.
Then, Eccles and Baldwin had their trial. They were accused of satanic murder.
Now, is that an actual charge?
I'm not sure.
I'm telling you right now, it's not.
Oh, okay.
I mean, but that's.
I can imagine that being a charge in
That sounds like some
Arkansas.
shit that they would have in Arkansas on the books. You're being charged with satanic murder.
I've never heard of such a charge, but that's what the prosecutor said. Okay. A witness by the name of Dale Griffiths, a graduate of the unaccredited Columbia Pacific University as an expert on the occult, claimed these were indeed satanic killings and the 2 boys were found guilty of murder. 3 counts. Eccles was sentenced to death and Baldwin was given life.
Okay, first of all, this guy is from an uncredited university. Like, it's not even a real place. Like, he went to like Microsoft Paint and made his diploma, framed it.
Just thought of a college.
Just came up with some shit off the top of his head, walked into a courtroom and said, "Oh yeah, those are totally satanic killings. I mean, that's how Satan told me to do it last time I did."
Oh my. Both Eccles and the defense claimed the genital mutilation was something he'd learned from television reports, but it meant nothing in court. Eccles also claimed that much of his information used to convict him was something discussed with him by Detective Ridge during unrecorded conversations and used against him. The prosecution couldn't care less, and all objections were overruled by the judge.
Yeah, there's so much of this going on in the cases that we cover where they're not recording these interrogation sessions.
Right.
Like, they just go on for hours upon hours upon hours, and you're going to see this again when we discuss the Central Park. How many of them damn people are in Central Park?
5.
Central Park 5. That's a lot of people in Central Park. It's a big place. New York's a big place.
Yes.
5 people. Central Park 5. Anyway, you're going to see that a lot in the Central Park 5. You see that in past cases too. In season 2 of the American Justice podcast, where the damn police department didn't even bother to crank up a tape recorder or a video camera the whole time that they're taking statements.
Not one time.
No, they're just, nope, this is how I remember it. Therefore, it must be true.
Right. Well, let's talk about the aftermath. The West Memphis police were scrutinized in regard to their handling of the crime scene. In their defense, at least they didn't do it in the dark.
Yeah, no shit.
Well, obviously, Ranger Collins wasn't there.
no, he's long gone.
It was trampled. The bodies had been removed from the creek before the coroner even arrived to check out the scene. They laid on the creek bed, decaying, exposed to the bugs and the sunlight. The coroner wasn't even called until 2 hours after the discovery of the bodies. The word substandard was used when describing the coroner's investigation. There was blood found at the scene, but never tested. This is contradictory to a couple of documentaries that have been produced over the years because they stated the victims were killed and the bodies dumped elsewhere. There was no controlled disclosure of information and tons of vocal speculation about the crime scene itself. It has even been said by experts that the police records were, for lack of a better term, a mess. They were overwhelmed and undereducated. They refused help from the Arkansas State Police because they, themselves, were currently under investigation for suspected theft from the county drug task force.
Well then.
Also, some of the evidence was stored in supermarket bags. Yes, the name of the supermarket was still visible.
Hey, Billy Joe Bob, you got that evidence? You got that evidence from the West Memphis 3 case?
Yeah, it's over there in that Piggly Wiggly bag.
Jesus, man, what is going on here?
I don't know. When police speculated about the assailant, the juvenile probation officer assisting at the scene of the murders speculated that Eccles was, quote, capable of committing the murders, stating, quote, it looks like Damian Eccles finally killed someone. Did anyone bother to check out this juvie officer? Was there any reason for him to finger Eccles as a suspect?
Yeah, I'm very curious about that, and I wish I knew more about this juvenile officer.
Yeah.
First of all, this is a juvenile probation officer. He has no business being at a crime scene whatsoever.
Right.
Like this isn't. I mean, I guess this is he's a law enforcement officer, but he's not a street officer. He has no rights.
Not a detective.
Right. He can't arrest without a warrant or anything like that. He's nobody. He's just being nosy. Or she. I don't know if it's a he or a she. But this juvenile probation officer is just out there being nosy and stirring up shit.
Right.
And it had so much bearing on the case. It's insane.
Well, forensic scientist and criminal profiler Brent Turvey stated in the documentary film Paradise Lost 2 that human bite marks were on one of the victims. They were first noticed years later in photographs after the trials had commenced and never viewed by a board-certified medical examiner until 4 years after the murders. The expert for the defense claimed that the bite mark wasn't from an adult, and it was concluded at the time that it wasn't a bite mark at all. It was eventually found that it was indeed a bite mark, and it didn't match the dental records of any of the 3 suspects.
Yes, there's a phantom biter running around in the woods of West Memphis, Arkansas.
So, Derick, let's talk about the appeals.
Yes, because there were.
Well, to put it bluntly, those were all thrown out by the Arkansas Supreme Court. I mean, why beat a dead horse? Judges hate appeals. Lazy judges.
Yeah, I mean, why is it even a part of our legal system if you're going to, are you going to appeal this? Yep. Well, tough shit.
99% are going to be denied.
Yeah, because I'm going to say the same thing this time as I said last time. I hope you were paying attention.
Right. Then the attorney just goes in and does a word name replace within word.
Right.
All right. New evidence. Let's talk about some new evidence.
Bring it.
John Mark Byers, the overly cooperative stepfather of victim Christopher Byers, gave a knife to a cameraman working on one of the first Paradise Lost documentaries. Later, the crew discovered blood on the knife, and HBO executives ordered them to give it to the West Memphis PD.
Yes, they found it in a barn, in a box.
Underneath 500 other boxes.
3 years after the fact.
John Byers claimed he'd never used the knife, but recanted as soon as he was told that there was blood found on it. He changed his mind to say he had used it once. Wow. Used once and cut himself.
He sucks at the knife thing.
Batting 1,000 in the knife department, this guy.
Yeah, for real.
I hope he never inherits a sword.
I know where he can get one. I know a barn where he can get one.
Yes, he claims to have used it once to cut deer meat. When he was told that the blood type found in the knife matched that of both him and his son, he played stupid. The West Memphis Police Department backed him up on this, suggesting that he may have cut himself while using the knife. Of course, Byers agreed with that when the police coached him into what to say. Why was West Memphis Police Department trying to protect this potential suspect? Was it the fact that they had botched their original investigation and their prime suspects were already incarcerated? Were they embarrassed? Byers was eventually given a polygraph because West Memphis Police Department just has those laying around, remember?
Yeah.
He passed, but was also on a lot of psychoactive drugs. Who knows if they read it correctly?
I've never taken a polygraph test, but I can imagine I would be nervous as shit if I was on drugs when I did it.
Especially when the first question is, have you ever taken any illegal drugs?
Define illegal.
In the late 90s, Eccles, Miss Kelly, and Baldwin submitted teeth imprints. They were compared with the bite mark found on Stevie Branch's forehead. They were not a match. Conveniently, John Mark Byers, our new potential suspect, had his teeth removed in 1997.
That's convenient.
I was going to say, is this an Arkansas thing too? His reasoning for having them removed are contradictory, but he claimed all types of crap from seizure meds to periodontal disease. Just say Arkansas, John. It's much simpler if you just say Arkansas.
Yes.
Later, an expert noticed a belt buckle imprint on a young Byers corpse, and John claimed he'd whipped the boy with the belt shortly before disappearing. Soon after, John Byers married Charla Woodruff. No, I'm kidding.
Hey, some like it rough, man.
Some of our season 1 fans will like that.
Yeah. Charla, if you're still listening, baby, you know where to find me.
Give him a call.
Mm-hmm.
Give him a call. Don't call me.
You can call me.
You can call CJ.
Yeah, what's our number here at the American Justice Podcast?
972-942-0444.
All right, Charla, if you're out there, you just call me, girl.
In 2003, Vicki Hutchison claimed to the Arkansas Times that every word she'd given in her police statements was a lie. She said the police threatened to take away her child if she didn't help secure convictions for Miss Kelly, Eccles, and Baldwin. She said the police had printed out photos of the three and were using them as targets for darts.
That sounds very typical of a small town sheriff's department right there. That's the kind of shit that I would walk in on at the Hunt County Sheriff's Department in their deputy's room. Just pictures of suspects or people that they'd incarcerated before, like printed out and drawn on and things like that. I used to come across that shit all the time. That actually happens. This is not very far-fetched from the truth.
That's crazy. Well, finally, in 2007, DNA evidence collected from the crime scene was tested. None of it matched the convicted. However, a hair found in one of the boy's knots was consistent with the child's stepfather.
Dum, da-dum, dum.
Dum, dum, dum. The police still stood by their conviction of Eccles and didn't care to investigate further. He had possession of a knife that belonged to the young boy, a knife that this little boy never failed to carry with him. It was found hidden in the stepfather's nightstand. It was later revealed that 2 statements written from 2 different individuals linked the stepfather, Terry Hobbs, to the murders. But West Memphis PD ignored them. Scary thought. The West Memphis 3 have been released from prison, but these 2 fathers are still free and running the streets. At least they were never convicted. They may be dead for all I know. I don't know. Google, maybe. Free and in your pocket.
My lazy pocket.
Your lazy pocket.
Yeah, I don't care to look them up.
All right. Well, it keeps getting better. In 2008, it was discovered that the jury foreman on the Eccles-Baldwin discussed the case with an attorney prior to deliberations. He was accused of advocating for the guilt of the defendants and sharing inadmissible evidence with other jurors.
It must be one of those people that were at that wedding in the Vincent Cozy case.
Also in 2008, attorney, now judge, wait, really?
Yeah.
Is this a popular thing? Crap, attorneys become judges after they railroad someone?
It must be in the contract.
Anyway, Miss Kelly's attorney. In September 2008, attorney, now judge, Daniel Stidham, who represented Miss Kelly in 1994, testified at a post-conviction relief hearing. Stidham testified under oath that during the trial, Judge David Burnett erred by making an improper communication with the jury during its deliberations. Stidham overheard Judge Burnett discuss taking a lunch break with the jury foreman and heard the foreman reply that the jury was almost finished. He testified, Judge Burnett responded, "You'll need food for when you come back for sentencing," and that the foreman asked in return what would happen if the defendant was acquitted. Stidham said the judge closed the door without answering. He testified that his own failure to put this incident on court record and his failure to meet the minimum requirements in state law to represent a defendant in a capital murder case was evidence of ineffective assistance of counsel, and that Miss Kelly's conviction should therefore be vacated.
I mean, it's the same thing here. You've got this little small town courtroom, this little small town police department, small town courtroom. It reminds me of the movie My Cousin Vinny.
Right.
Just every time I talk about or think about this case, writing this particular episode, all I could think about was Fred Gwynn in judge's robes in My Cousin Vinny. That's has to be what it was like.
These two what?
These two Utes.
Utes.
These tree Utes.
What's a Ute?
They were at the Wiccan meeting.
All right, well, let's talk about a retrial. In 2007, Eccles' defense attorney sought a retrial for his immediate release. Terry Hobbs, the knife, and animal mutilation to one of the victim's genitals were cited as reasoning. It was denied in 2008 and appealed to the Arkansas Supreme Court in 2010. The judge who denied the appeal was appointed to the Arkansas State Senate.
Everybody gets a raise.
All right. Well, let's talk about the Alford plea. After weeks of negotiations in 2011, the West Memphis 3 were released as part of an Alford plea deal, which is a legal proceeding which allows defendants to plead guilty while still asserting innocence, even though the prosecutors may have sufficient evidence to secure a conviction. The convictions were vacated and a new trial was ordered. The Alford plea was entered and the 3 were given time served. The prosecution agreed because 2 of the victims' families had joined the defense's cause. As part of the plea deal, neither of the West Memphis 3 could pursue civil action against the state for wrongful imprisonment. In other words, we screwed up and you can't gig us for it. Many on both sides of the fence were pissed off about the plea deal. The prosecutor was even quoted as saying that if they were retried, they would more than likely be acquitted due to the now powerful legal counsel, celebrity backing, loss of evidence, and witnesses changing their minds over the years.
Now that's something right there in itself. The families of 2 of the victims, so we're talking 2/3 of the victims' families have changed to support the defendants.
Right.
That ought to say enough right there.
Right, exactly. Well, there have been quite a few documentary films, as we mentioned, and books written on this case since it occurred in 1993. Some of them swing towards their innocence, and some lean into their potential guilt. I'm unbiased in all of this, with one exception. The Devil's Knot film released in 2013 is Reese Witherspoon's only phoned-in performance of her entire career. Absolutely horrible.
It's trash.
As far as the remainder of the films and books go, you already know what I'm going to say. Free and in your pocket.
Exactly. There's a lot of it out there, too. I suggest anybody who's interested in this, go to Amazon and just fire away. I'm not going to tell you to go to a bookstore. Nobody goes to bookstores anymore. Just go to Amazon and fire away.
All right. See, Derick, do we have any final thoughts?
My final thoughts on this case is this case so far with the American Justice Podcast is the one that I take the most personal, because I really was no different than these 3 people growing up in a small town that didn't like me, because of the music I listened to, or the t-shirts I wore, or my hair, or my lack of affiliation with a religious organization, things like that. I was the devil because of what I looked like. And I was a good kid too. Never got in trouble with the law or anything like that, although I probably should have quite a few times. I just didn't get caught. I didn't say that.
It's not illegal if you don't get caught.
That was the devil right there. That was the devil. I brought him home from that Wiccan meeting. But seriously, I think back to, these kids just going out and they're doing their thing, and they're just misunderstood, and a horrible crime happens, and you've got a town full of people going, who in the hell could have did this? And the hippies did it. And they point at these three people, and the next thing you know, they're spending a big chunk of their life behind bars. One of them sentenced to death, and now they're pretty much just, even though they're free, they're pretty much ruined for the rest of their lives just because of some music that they listen to.
And I read something that Damien Eccles, they were actually going to not accept the Alford plea. But Damien Eccles, he was just deteriorating in prison. His eyesight was going bad. His health was just going, they had no other choice. If he would have stayed in prison, he would have been dead in 5 years probably.
Right. If any of the West Memphis three happen to catch this episode, please, by all means, feel free to reach out to me through social media or through this podcast. I would love to get your side of the story personally, just one-on-one. I think that would be great. We could even have you here on the show.
I was going to say we could do that as a follow-up episode.
Right.
That'd be awesome.
Love to have them on here.
And we'd be willing to, any money that we made from it, we'd be willing to give them I don't know how, they weren't allowed to sue the state, so I don't know if they're making money on books or what they're doing, but we would definitely do whatever we could to help them out. I do want to tell a kind of a personal story about this case. One of the reasons that I really felt strong about taking on this case in the first few weeks of season 3 is, I saw the Paradise Lost documentaries a while ago, a long time ago, almost when they first came out. Maybe not when they first came out, but a long time ago. And in Paradise Lost, the very opening scene is showing the crime scene where they found the bodies. And they show these kids completely. They show them naked. They show their genital mutilation. They show how their bodies were hogtied, how they were found. And that really affected me when I saw it. It was actually one of the main reasons that I felt a calling to go into healthcare, and to especially pediatric healthcare, to help kids like that. But it's crazy, man, to think that these kids were doing nothing but just playing and having fun and being kids and being innocent. And some monster comes along and does all this stuff that they did to these kids. Just absolutely affected me. And I would strongly encourage anyone that hasn't seen the Paradise. There's actually 3 Paradise Lost. There's the one before trial. There's one during the trial, which I think is 2. And then there's a Paradise Lost 3, which is a follow-up for, all of the how they got them out and stuff like that. So I would suggest, if anybody has not watched those, to go find them. I'm pretty sure you can find them on HBO.com or HBO Max or whatever. And but yeah, it will change just to see. It's one thing to sit here and talk about these kids and the way that they were hogtied and the way that they had their genitals mutilated and all this stuff. It's one thing to sit here and talk about it, but when you see it with your own eyes,
no, for real,
it'll change you, and it'll definitely change your perspective on a lot of things.
No, and also in my many years of research over the years, whether it be psychological criminal profiling or if it's something that I'm going to write about in a horror novel, I know that when it comes to mutilation, when it comes to extreme violence of a corpse, mutilation, it's usually personal.
Right.
Personal or an occult type killing. And they were grasping at straws in West Memphis, Arkansas back then because of their,
they just had no other suspects.
Right. The association with I mean, it's a Bible Belt thing. Their association with the hair and the dress and the music and the lifestyle. Oh, those guys are definitely Satanists.
And he checked out a book on the occult one time from the library.
Yeah,
that,
he went to the library and checked out a book on the occult. But the stepfather,
there's that. That's a whole episode in itself, because these two guys, being found with the knife and the blood and all that stuff. I think it's pretty clear that it's hard to explain that away.
Right.
But anyways.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that'll do it for another episode of the American Justice Podcast. Until next time, remember to stay aware,
stay strong,
and get involved.
Later.
We'll see you next time.
The American Justice Podcast is owned and copyrighted by Atua Productions, LLC of Dallas, Texas. Your hosts are Scott Poggensee and C. Derick Miller. Atua Productions aims for this to be an interactive podcast where you, the audience, has a great amount of influence on the content of our shows. You can interact with us in several ways. First, and most preferred, is you can leave us a voicemail. Our phone number is 972-942-0444. Be sure to leave your name and city you're calling from, along with whether or not we can use your voice on the air. If Facebook is more your style, you can log on to our Facebook page at facebook.com/American Justice Podcast. Feel free to leave a comment, or you can message us on Messenger if you have a more pressing question or issue. If you'd like to blog about the show, you can log on to AmericanJusticePodcast.com and let us know what you think there. If you're a tweeter, you can also voice your opinion on Twitter at @AJusticePodcast. We would very much appreciate it if you could give us a 5-star review on all the podcast streaming platforms.